Hey guys, welcome back to my Practically Imperfect Life. Today I wanted to share a homeschool science experiment that I came up with to do with my high school students. It is one that I feel could be easily done with both middle school and high schoolers. You could simply adjust how in-depth you're going with analyzing the information you're gathering, but it was incredibly fun to do, very eye-opening and educational. I learned so much along the way, right along with my students, and we're looking forward to doing it again in the future. Now, this experiment was inspired by our Guest Hollow Chemistry in the Kitchen course. That's a course that both of my kids are doing this year, and it is a course that teaches chemistry, but in a really unique way. It is taught through a variety of books and videos and hands-on projects, and not just regular science experiments, mind you. These are kitchen experiments, so things that you are either doing with kitchen supplies or things that you are baking, things that you are cooking. You're learning a chemistry principle and then you're seeing it in action in what it is you're making for a recipe each week. So it's been a lot of fun learning chemistry in that way with both of my kids. I've read ahead on quite a few of the books that are recommended for the course, and one of them that really stood out to me was Pandora's Lunchbox. Now, this book looks at processed foods in the American diet largely, how foods are made nowadays, the additives that are put into them, the way that nutrients are lost, and how it's overall impacting our health. And it really got me thinking about the foods that we're consuming in our own home. Because like many of you, there are days where I just don't have time to make things from scratch, and so I'll go for something easy and rarely think about what exactly is in that food that I'm feeding my family. Now, after doing a lot of this reading, I have really come to analyze what I'm buying a lot more closely and wanting to try to make really good decisions on what I'm feeding my family as much as possible, because we know it is a balance between time and budget and food availability and things like that. So that's where the thought process came in for this experiment, where I started to come up with this idea. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we were to take a common dish, something that we already as a family eat a lot, and we look at the very processed version of that dish, something that you'd get maybe ready-made from the store. What exactly is in that dish ingredient-wise? How does that thing cook up or bake up? What does it taste like? What are our thoughts on it? Then do a somewhat homemade version. So if we were maybe using some pre-made products and putting them together to create that dish. So it wasn't fully processed, but it was partially processed. And again, look at what is actually in that food product, find out more about those ingredients and those additives and really learn about them, and then make a fully homemade from scratch version of it. And again, look at the ingredients, look at the nutrition quality of it, and then taste test the three. See what our thoughts are on them. What is it that we observe about them? What are our thoughts on the ingredients and the things that we find out about them along the way? And it was something that I thought would just be really fun for us to try, see what we thought, and if we wanted to, we could repeat that experiment again in the future. I also like that this experiment was going to teach my kids quite a few different things. One, we were going to look at chemistry principles. How did the things that were added to these food products change the way that they cooked or baked? How did that affect the taste or the texture, how long something would last? And we would be making certain things for the homemade version that would utilize chemistry principles we had learned earlier in the year.
Just to give a quick example, in making mozzarella cheese, you are adding an acid, that's the citric acid, to the milk, and what that does is it causes the proteins to be able to coagulate and come together to form the cheese curd. And then that is heated up and rennet is added in order to form a stronger cheese curd. We take that out, we separate the curds out, and then they are worked, that is stretched and massaged and softened in hot water in order to create a ball of mozzarella cheese. So we went through what was happening in this reaction, what was happening as the pH was lowering, what was happening as we were working the mozzarella.
The second thing is that it would give my kids hands-on cooking experience. We were going to make some things that were partially homemade and some things that were from scratch. And we also were going to get to talk about budgeting for food, because the cost of ingredients is going to vary with these different types of recipes or buying something that's totally homemade. And that or totally processed. And that would bring about a good discussion about how it is you can adjust your family's food budget to be able to make foods of different quality and different nutritional value. For this experiment, we decided we were going to do pizza as the food we were going to analyze because that is something our family eats a lot of anyways. And to be honest, most of the time it's frozen pizzas that we get. We try to get brands that we think look like they might be semi-decent, but to be honest, I don't sit there in the frozen food aisle and analyze the ingredients list. And so who knows really what's in that frozen pizza that we're eating a couple of times a month. So we decided pizza was going to be our first food. And we went to the store, we got a frozen pepperoni pizza. Then we got ingredients to make a semi-homemade version. So we got a jar of pizza sauce, we got packaged cheese, we got a pre-made crust, and then we picked out some toppings. And then we looked up some recipes to make a fully from scratch recipe at home. So homemade pizza dough, homemade pizza sauce, homemade mozzarella cheese, and then, of course, some fresh toppings. So after we made these 3 types of pizza and took a look at them and noted our observations on how they looked, the texture, and the taste, we started to really hone in on the ingredients. Now, our homemade pizza was obviously the easiest one for us to do this for, and I'm just going to throw these up on the screen so you can see the ingredients as we go through. But our homemade pizza had tomatoes from our garden that we had canned, so it was literally just tomatoes with some spices added, some spices and herbs. We made the homemade mozzarella cheese, which had the whole milk, the citric acid, a little bit of cheese salt. Our homemade crust was yeast, whole wheat flour, and I made sure to get a whole wheat flour that wasn't enriched, it wasn't bleached. We used a little tiny bit of sugar to activate the yeast, olive oil, salt, and then we did some fresh vegetables. We did the onion, mushroom, green pepper, and then we did use packaged pepperoni because I don't know how to make homemade pepperoni. maybe in a future video. Our semi-homemade pizza wasn't horrible, but definitely had a few more things on that ingredient list that we didn't have in our homemade version. For example, the pizza sauce we used was made from a tomato puree. The second ingredient on that list was sugar. So the second highest quantity was sugar in that, whereas we didn't use any sugar in our homemade pizza sauce. Sea salt, olive oil, onions, garlic, citric acid, spices, and oregano. And we also, as we were going through, we were making a note of sodium counts here too. So you'll see me put the sodium counts up there. The pepperoni we bought was made from pork, beef, salt, dextrose, which is a type of sugar, spices, oleo resin of paprika. I'll explain what that means later. Sodium erythorbate, flavorings, lactic acid, starter culture, sodium nitrate. So notice too, again here, anytime you see salt or something with sodium, that sodium molecule is going to break up and introduce salt into the body as it's digested. So sodium content of the pepperoni, one serving was 510 milligrams there. We did a packaged mozzarella cheese, so a pre-shredded mozzarella cheese, and that said it was made from low moisture part skim mozzarella cheese, which was cultured, pasteurized, reduced fat milk, salt, enzymes, anti-cake, potato starch, and powdered cellulose, natamycin, which is a mold inhibitor, 190 milligrams of sodium. And then we used a brand called Just Roll pizza crust that was made from wheat flour, water, palm oil, wheat gluten, salt, olive oil, sodium acid, pyrophosphate, baking soda, natural flavor, sorbic acid, datum, mono and diglycerides, citric acid, xanthan gum, wheat starch, ascorbic acid, and yeast. And if you're looking at that list and you're like, I don't know what half of those things are, just wait. We're going to get to that. And then the last thing we did was we looked at our pre-made pizza. Now, we had just gotten a little personal size pizza. It was a DiGiorno pepperoni frozen pizza, just a hand-tossed personal size because we really weren't looking forward to eating it as that much. So we didn't want to make a huge one. But look at this list. I'm not going to read every single ingredient on this list, but you can see just how big that list is. Now, granted, that is for the crust, the cheese, the sauce, and the toppings. But some things that might pop out at you is, for example, enriched wheat flour. It lists the wheat flour and then niacin, iron, thiamine, riboflavin, folic acid, all of the things that were added back into it. When you get to the pepperoni, pork, mechanically separated chicken, beef, salt, spices, dextrose, sodium nitrate, sodium ascorbate, paprika, BHA, BHT, citric acid. Down a little further, you can see where we've got, it says enzyme blend, quick step CL, cellulose gum, wheat flour, dextrose, barley flour, soybean oil, enzymes, ascorbic acid, and so on and so forth. So we went through these lists then, and we made a note of things that we weren't overly familiar with. We basically highlighted things that were interesting to us. And one thing I did want to point out to my kids was the amount of sodium in each of these, and explained that salt is one thing. Most of us see salt on an ingredient list and we go, oh yeah, salt, I got to watch my salt intake. But anything that is a sodium-based molecule, so for example, sodium phosphate, that will break apart and that will introduce sodium into the body. So when you're looking at total sodium content of food, you have to look at that for that on the ingredient list as well. So you can see in that personal pan-sized pizza, there was 1,460 milligrams of sodium. So a lot of sources of salt in both the semi-homemade version and the fully processed version there. But after we got that list of things we weren't familiar with, we wanted to do some research. Now, we used some of the books that we had from the Guest Hollow program to do our research. So we looked through the Pandora's Lunchbox, which gave some information on how certain things are made and what it means when we say something is enriched, and how that impacts nutrition. We also reread portions that talked about how our bodies use added vitamins in foods. For example, if you are processing a wheat flour and they are in the process of getting it to a stable form, a shelf stable form that's going to last for a really, really long time, a lot of the nutrition is pulled out of that. A ton of it is. And then they add it back in with artificial vitamins, like lab created vitamins and minerals, because they're trying to, add back some nutritional value. But there was an interesting chapter in the book, Pandora's Lunchbox, that talked about studies that were being done where test animals were being fed vitamins and nutrients that came from natural sources and those that were added into other food sources. And it was found that the animals eating food from, getting nutrients from a natural source were healthier, and they were absorbing and using more of those nutrients than those that were getting it from an artificially enriched product. And what they're now trying to figure out is why that is. Is there something else going on within the food, or things that are in that food that are, working in conjunction with that vitamin or mineral that's allowing the body to uptake it better and utilize it better? And that's a really interesting area of food science and food chemistry that is being explored more as people are starting to take more of an interest in what it is they are consuming. The other thing we did was some research on different websites. So we found a lot of great information on the Food and Drug Administration site, but one site that I really liked was this food additive site, and I will link it down below if you want to check it out. But it was really cool because you could put in the name of almost any additive or anything that you didn't recognize in an ingredient list, and it would pull up an article for you. It would explain what that additive is, what its purpose is. It would talk about its chemical formula, how it's processed and created, different sources from it, different uses from it, and if it had any health benefits or health concerns related to it. It was a ton of information about each and every one. And I actually had 6 pages of information. Now, I don't want to give you 6 pages of information because you guys would lose your patience with me. But how about all of those sodium additives? What was their purpose? Well, sodium nitrate, for example, was used as a color fixative and as an antibacterial agent. So sodium nitrate helps maintain the bright red color in processed muscle foods. It also plays a role in ensuring safety of the product by suppressing the growth of different bacteria that can cause food poisoning. Now, something interesting that we found on this website about sodium nitrates is that they can react with secondary amines that are generated as proteins are broken down in the stomach. So essentially, when a protein is broken down by the acids in your stomach, it will break up into the different amino acids. And it says that sodium nitrate can react with some of these secondary amines to produce a carcinogen. And so in countries like Japan, there's a strict regulation on the concentration of this. Now, while the amount of sodium-based additives that I was seeing in a lot of these products was concerning, there were some ingredients that I thought I would be concerned about simply because I wasn't familiar with them that seemed pretty benign after we did some research. For example, the oleoresin of paprika is something that's similar to kind of like having an essential oil version of different things. That's the way they explained it. It is a natural way of enhancing the flavor, the aroma, and the color, and the way that that spice is added into that ingredient. So that seemed like a fairly okay additive to have. And it's something that it looks like they're trying to trend towards more instead of using a chemical-based additive. We dove even further and looked up the way that some of these additives are actually made and what they initially come from. Ascorbic acid, for example, is something that's used as a food preservative. So it helps to lower the pH in the food so that fungi and yeast and bacteria cannot grow. But here's the process about how that is made. So ascorbic acid starts as sorbitol, which is a sugar alcohol made commercially by cleaving apart and rearranging corn molecules with enzymes and a hydrogenation process. Then there's fermentation that occurs with bacteria that turns the sorbitol into sorbose, another fermentation stage to turn it into 2-ketogluconic acid. Then it's treated with hydrochloric acid to form crude ascorbic acid, and then that is filtered and purified and milled into a powder. That seems like a whole bunch of chemical steps to create this one additive to simply preserve something longer. Overall, it was just incredibly eye-opening to really learn exactly what is in this food that we were consuming, and things that really stood out to us were things like the number of sodium-based products that were included in there, the sheer volume of things that were in there strictly to help that food not go bad quickly. And while it's great to be able to have a product that will last, in my fridge for quite a while, it's also a bit concerning the amount of things that have to go into it in order to make it that shelf stable. All in all, this was a really fun and educational experiment to do with my kids. Not only did we learn a lot about what is in the different food products and the chemical composition of them, how it is they react, what it is they are for, we also got to practice doing chemical reactions through the baking process. So we made that homemade dough and we got to do the yeast reaction. We created a reaction when we made mozzarella cheese. So we really got to put principles we had been learning about and practicing in previous weeks in the Chemistry in the Kitchen course and utilize them again. It also opened up a great discussion on time and money. We obviously saw that making something from scratch took considerably more time than just popping a frozen pizza in the oven or even doing a semi-homemade pizza. But what's the trade-off? Is it worth it to do that little extra effort to make something fully from scratch? Which for us, we thought it was definitely worth it. We thought the taste was a lot better in something that was completely homemade. We knew what was going in it. We could name every single ingredient on that list. We didn't have to look anything up on an online food additive encyclopedia. So while it did take more time, that was something we thought was worth it. We also were able to do a little cost comparison, the cost of the different ingredients, because it was actually cheapest to make our homemade pizza. When you broke down the certain amount of flour that we needed, the certain amount of sugar, the tomatoes and everything, in reality, it was cheaper to do that, and we were able to make quite a large pizza from it. The next least expensive was the fully processed frozen pizza, and then the semi-homemade was the most expensive by the time we bought the separate dough, the separate jar of sauce, the separate bag of cheese, and then the toppings. So again, opened it up a lot of discussion with my kids on food choices and budget. So we look forward to trying this experiment again in the future with a different recipe or a different common food product. My kids have suggested things like trying to do homemade Pop-Tarts and looking at the ingredients in that, or even trying our hand at making like a homemade cereal or homemade granola. There's really, the sky's the limit. You could do almost anything. If you can find a processed or like a fully pre-made version of that product in the store, you can probably find a recipe to try to create a homemade version of it and do this comparison. So I hope this gave you some inspiration on some things that you could try to do with your teens. I feel like project-based and experiment-based learning is fantastic for kids in middle school and high school. It really shows them why the things we're teaching them are important and how they actually apply to their life. Just reading about something in a chemistry textbook can be very boring. I was a chemistry major in college. I understand it can be very boring. But when you see how it actually works in real life, and not just in something that isn't tangible, like you might read about a chemical reaction, what happens like in an oil production, right? That's important, but it's not something that is right there in front of us. But food production, the things that we're creating and eating, is. It's something that you can see and feel and touch and experiment with right there in your own kitchen. And I feel like it's just a fabulous way of learning. Anyways, thanks so much for joining me for today's video, everybody. Really appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this video, you found the content helpful, consider buying me a coffee. Just click the link down below if you'd like to support my channel in that way. Happy homeschooling, everybody. See you in the next video.